Okay.
All right. Well, welcome to Game Localization. We'll have a,
Yeah.
I guess we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Gordon Brown. I am a localization producer for Carbine Studios. I've been in the industry for about 6 years now. Got my start in South Korea as an editor and writer for a translation company, and just kind of worked my way up from there. So, yeah.
Yeah, my name is Molly Jameson. Most of my time in localization was as a UI programmer at Insomniac, where UI deals very closely with the localization team and how things actually look and what gets recorded there. My main motivation for doing this talk is I want to talk about English speaking is sort of an underexamined privilege that people have, and just how internationalization is a part of diversity. So Twitter following, plug, if you were so inclined, and we are...
I do have a Twitter handle. I just wanted to look cool, but I don't check it. I've never posted. So if you want to contact, we have emails at the end.
Yeah.
That's a better way to contact people.
Yeah.
But since we've got a small group, I figure we could just do what real off the cuff. If anybody has a question, just, feel free to interrupt, throw something at us. Sure.
Yeah. So mainly we're looking at talking about what is localization in general, going from other languages into English, and going from if you're making a game now to English and to another game. Are you guys mostly making games and content, or?
I'm a localization producer.
Okay.
Yay! Awesome.
Cool.
So are you just interested in the topic, or is it actually that's your profession? So that's cool. It's awesome. Nice. Okay.
Nice.
Manager. Okay.
Cool.
So are you the odd one out?
Well, I guess I'm just a fan and considering going into information science and translation.
Okay.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay.
So do people speak multiple languages, or does everybody have at least two? Cool.
Ah. Okay. I don't actually, which is weird. A lot of people think, in localization you have to be able to speak 3 or 4 languages, but I don't. Korean really, really poorly, and Japanese I can tell taxis where to go. That's about it. So.
I can navigate menus in Spanish.
Yay! But it's you don't. So you don't need to know multiple languages, but it certainly does help,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
So you guys are familiar then with what localization is. We don't have to really
Sweet.
dive deep into that. We can skip.
Yeah. Cool. We can go briefly over. Everyone can. This is my favorite comic that I've ever seen about localization. This is
It's true. And it drives a point home, right?
So effectively, localization is not translation, right? It's about finding a more an appropriate look and feel for that region as it stands now. So yeah, but we'll just skip right over this since most people are familiar with it here, I guess. So how do you feel localization fits in terms of your experience? How far would you take it versus just translating and changing things?
The biggest part is just knowing who your audience is, who your target is. If you are making a game that's intended for children, for example, like maybe 6 years old, and you translate from, say, Japan to the United States, and you include things like chopsticks or yen or other cultural things. Kids might not know that yen is actually money. So okay, let's swap that out. Actually change the art to look like something else, to look like dollars or whatever it is that they're familiar with, and make modifications to the. You're probably going to have to go further, right? Depending on how ignorant your. It sounds terrible. How ignorant your target
your
demographic
6-year-olds are.
Yeah. But if you're trying to make a game or a product or whatever that's intended for adults who hopefully have some sort of experience or exposure to other cultures, then you can certainly be less heavy-handed with what you do.
Yeah, I think you hear a certain amount of backlash about that on the internet. I certainly hear from people who are already bilingual and decide they're so into games they want to go on the internet and bitch about it in English, about how terrible a translation was.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a vocal minority of you clearly already speak English to complain directly at me. I don't think this translation was aimed at you.
Yeah, yeah. Like, we're
And-
sorry that we ruined whatever it was that you loved, but yeah, you're not who we were making it for.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I think that's a vocal minority
Yeah.
that is
No, on most things, people complain. They're always the minority.
right.
But it doesn't mean we can ignore them. It doesn't-
Well, it's weird because like since I don't speak a lot of the languages we're targeted at, I have to sort of trust our publisher, like QA, to just, you know, tell us how it actually turned out and get enough second opinions. Because who we really want to know about is like the people who wouldn't have experienced the game had you not put up all this extra effort into releasing it for them. And so that's a hard feedback loop to get into, particularly on the developer side. But yeah, hopefully you can see it through sales and
Yeah.
things.
Finding, like, if you work in a large enough studio where you can either have an internal localization team or have access to somebody whose opinion you really trust in order to say, all right, we're going to go into Chinese. So we need to have somebody who is fluent in that language, preferably a native speaker, to at least evaluate the work that you're getting back from outside translation vendors. And they can say,
Does
like,
this
yeah,
directly
great.
match Google Translate? If so, bad.
I got that so many times. Like I would look at a string that came to me as when I was back in editing, and I'd be like, this doesn't make any sense at all. So I just plug it into Google Translate and I get the exact same thing. I'm like, wow, we paid somebody for this, and that's what we got. So be careful who you hire. It's a bunch of lazy translators out there. Well, that was we had okay.
Tell us more.
Now you're gonna, all right, get me into complain mode for a while. We had
I'm gonna pause on the
trying to
slide 'cause it
find
looks better.
certain people, like certain language pairs are really tough, right? Like if you're looking for Korean to English translation and you're trying to find native English speakers who are fluent in Korean, there's not very many. So, okay, yeah, there's a lot of Korean Americans, and yes, they're fluent in both languages. That doesn't make them a good translator. Actually, probably makes them worse in a way, because they make a lot of cultural assumptions about things. And yeah, we being based in Seoul didn't have that option so much. We just had to deal with people who, maybe studied English for 4 years and thought that they could just write novels now, and that's just wasn't the case. So have someone you trust on your
Right.
team, someone you can speak with and help evaluate the work that you're getting. That certainly helps.
Yeah. And the other thing about localization is it's a really all-encompassing topic of how far, how much money you want to put into it in terms of the levels you want to do. Like, it's not just like we're going to get a bunch of really cultured people and do a full translation. Like, you can just, when you say localization, that includes just changing your currency, or like for your in-app purchases, if your store doesn't support that, which most of them do now. That could just be subtitling, and that could be doing like a full just audio translation, and then also doing all the bells and whistles of perhaps asset replacement.
Yeah.
So
But that's expensive. So
Sorry.
we don't like to do that.
Blizzard can do that.
They have money.
Yeah. If you haven't played Blizzard games in other languages, they do full re-renders of all their cinematics. Yeah. Do you work at Blizzard? Or?
Those two do.
Nice. I'm very impressed.
I like
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
They're a great team. I've worked with them in the past. Yes. Question.
Changing a game like Diablo for an audience like China, there were significant changes like that to do with like how bodies could be shown or like skeletons.
Fun anecdotal thing about China. So I work Carbine. We have WildStar, and we're localizing it into China right now. China, actually, there's no law or rules that says you can't have bones, and yet everybody takes it out. So why do they do this? Yeah, no, it's not. One of the things is just they have this whole list of really vague guidelines, and one of them is you can't promote superstitions or cults. And so I think and games have gotten blacklisted before because of, I don't know, maybe the government is just like, we don't like this one, and just decided to like, bones. And that's why we don't like it. Because these rules are super vague. So it ends up being a lot of companies are censoring them. They're censoring themselves in order to get past the review board in China. Gap, is it? Gap, I think it's called. So I think that's a real negative thing as far as you've got people who are intentionally censoring themselves because they're afraid of not being able to make it into China and making all that sweet, sweet Chinese money. So, and that sucks. That really sucks to me. Right. It would be great if we could push the government to sort of redefine their laws or at least be a lot more specific about it.
Can you please be specific about your censorship?
Yeah, can you please tell us just yes or no?
Just
yeah.
all government bodies.
Yeah. So have you done a lot of work into Chinese?
I have studied their politics for 4 years now, and I read all of the little publishings of, do not publish any articles regarding this topic. And it's a very vague sort of, if you publish this, you might actually disappear for 6 months. They don't actually mention.
Do not challenge the sovereignty. Yeah.
Do not challenge the Ministry of Truth.
And that's
Yeah.
really unfortunate that they have such cultural power that they can do that.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't know. It's do we want, because as the states we have a lot of cultural power as well. Do we just try and steamroll people, which I think we do in smaller markets, and that's maybe not so good.
Well, the steamrolling it can be learn English, and that's not necessarily great either.
Watch soaps. Learning English.
But yeah, so I guess going the other way, one of the more interesting topics is like what sort of assumptions do people make in other cultures that are sort of taboo in US environments?
Oh, something else that just occurred to me as you talked about when Diablo went to China. I was in Korea at the time when Diablo 3 came to Korea, and there was actually a lot of complaints from players that I knew. They were just complaining about because the voice acting. They re-recorded everything into Korean, of course, but they took away all the flavor from all the characters. So each of the characters in Diablo has a kind of a nationality kind of thing. You've got the slightly Asian, the sorceress, and then there's the monk is like kind of Russian flavored a little bit. They have accents. They have something to differentiate themselves, in English anyway. But then when it came to Korean, they all just became the same. And as my friend put it, it's like the wizard talks like a school teacher. They're all really dry and boring. And I thought that was really unfortunate that kind of neat aspect of it was just stripped entirely for the Korean audience. And I asked the localization team, the Blizzard localization team, why did you do this? And they said, well, the Korean players it's weird to hear accented Korean. And then I thought, oh God, yeah, that's right. We listen to it all the time in English, I grew up in a city in Florida, so I heard all kinds of accents. And it wasn't something that was really weird to me. And then I realized that, if you live in this other country that has a linguistic homogeny, then, they don't get that kind of flavor, and they don't expect it, and it's very strange and off-putting to them. So, they lost that. They lost that flavor, and I found that to be really just unfortunate.
Did you want to talk about blackface?
Oh, God. So, okay. So we were working on this other game, this little mobile game where babies fight each other, which, okay, we're already starting off at a bad point. And then all the little kids were there was the British one and then the one from Africa. Each of them came from a different continent. And of course, the one that was African was a little bit racist. And you could buy cosmetic things for it. You could buy like hats and stuff or fish or something to beat the other babies with. And one of the hats for the little African child was a watermelon. And I know. And I told the developers, you have to take this out. You cannot include this in a Western release. And they're just like, why? I was like, oh God, I don't have 2 hours to explain this to you. It's because I tell you guys, you're just like, oh, that sounds terrible. But other cultures don't have the history behind it. They don't have the cultural knowledge to understand, like, why is it so bad? They can Google image search and they'll see a bunch of things of, like, here's a black person eating fried chicken, or other stereotypical racist things that have such cultural meaning to us, but mean nothing to them. And they don't mean any offense by it. They really don't.
Right. So that's the important thing to keep in mind. It's like there's a lot of cultural slights that aren't intended. And really are just coming from a place of, I did a Google image search.
And there it was.
This is what you people have upvoted.
So you have to be on the watch for that kind of stuff all the time, of course. And hopefully the developers you're working with are open to the idea of changing things. Because if they're not, then sorry.
Yeah.
your game might not pass review boards or whatever. I don't know. Can the ESRB do anything about that? Can they just be like, sorry?
I've never heard the ESRB doing anything about stereotypes. Like the
Yeah.
ESRB is mainly concerned about nudity.
Just content, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's. Yeah, this was the thing our other panelist, Brad, was really going to talk about, because I have very little experience in this field other than listening to. I used to come from LA, where there's a lot of ex-Square Enix QA people that would have more to say on the things that are in unfiltered Square games that do not make it into the American release. So, as much as people like to talk about the skimpy schoolgirls that do get in, you ain't seen nothing yet for the
Yeah.
original.
Well, there was some art done, and so I didn't work on the game personally, but Terra had to undergo some art changes when it came over, because one of the races is a small like they're sprite children or whatever, but they look like 9-year-old girls, and the outfits they would wear were really skimpy. So when it came over to the West, en masse, they're the ones who did the localization for it. They decided to change that. They decided to put some more clothes on those little kids, which I'm okay with. I'm really kind of okay with.
You prefer your children clothed? That's
Too.
good.
But there was a huge, well, not a huge, there was a big outcry from people who were offended by this. They were like, no, this is the original artistic vision.
Why are developers always censoring
Why are
themselves
they
before the
censoring
game comes
themselves?
out?
Yeah. See, there you go. They were censoring themselves already. But
Putting clothes on children.
But that, yeah. How dare they? But
Probably
as you
took
said,
out some bugs too.
It was the vocal minority again. It was the vocal minority people who have this this idea that localization is not something that's for everybody. It's just for them. It's like, sorry, we have to take into account lots of other things.
Lots of other people.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything.
But that's art, and that's difficult, and that's expensive, and people don't want to do that so much. It's easier to do with text, of course. You can easily change the context of a dialogue. You can easily change people's personalities or opinions or whatever just by rewriting the text, which that certainly happens a
Or
lot.
if you're an anime, massively recutting Macross
Oh.
style.
Moving things around, yeah.
You're my cousin now.
You're now male.
Yes.
The way you're drawn is kind of in a way.
But yeah, so I guess now we can switch gears to localizing from English to other companies. I was going to try and make myself not nerd out too much and be more basic and not talk about like how much I like UTF-8 and how important it is to be on that. But cool, I can talk about how much I like character encodings and how UTF-8 is like way easier than Unicode, and I had to write a bunch of conversions for that. And has anybody done a game in a right-to-left language to port out, like Arabic? How did it turn out? Very well. All right.
Oh, it looks like she needs a hug now.
I've only done it in terms of like images for Japanese, where it's
Oh, you did
The vertical,
by-
yeah.
vertical and right to left. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we got mentioned on Sunset Overdrive, but we didn't actually get to do. Yeah, so that's a text field. I'm really text field. That's a field I'm interested in terms of where games are going. I'd like to see more games in Arabic regions, but for that, more things would need to support proper rendering. I think that's a big problem in like the HTML rendering engines right now. There's a bunch of Google pages or just Chrome pages you can look at of this is how broken Chrome is if you speak Arabic. And it is kind of sad.
Even Google can't get it right. God, guys, come on.
So in terms of like next frontiers, I think that's something really exciting that I'd like to see localization push more for.
Yeah.
Arabic regions.
Kind of curious from those guys who, like the three of you who work internally, and how much input do you have with your engineers or your programmers or such before a project really gets underway?
We work pretty close with them. Our head office is in Tokyo, and every day we spend with them, so yeah, pretty close.
Okay, so you can kind of maybe catch things before they become a serious problem?
Yeah.
That's nice. That is not the norm,
Yeah.
which is very unfortunate. Yeah, a lot of the studios I've worked with didn't have localization teams at all. They were just, the idea was, let's hire a firm to do it.
Throw it over the wall.
My firm, and then, yeah, we'll just give them a text dump and be done with it, like wash our hands of the whole thing, which super sucks.
Yeah.
So that's
Also
good.
something I would like to see change.
Yeah. Consultation with localization people would be
Right.
super awesome. And it would save you a lot of money in the long run, I think. But
Yeah.
I don't know how to convince people. I'm trying really hard, but it's not working so well.
But yeah, in terms of like action items, I see a lot of like talks at GaymerX about like making your first game. So this was more like the tips for if you're making your first game, sort of steps you would need to do to actually release it to other markets that I see a lot of junior level UI programmers making, starting with don't hard code strings in your game or I will find you. So yeah, if you're a new UI programmer, will often like want to put things in the game as fast as they can because that's what they're told to do by their bosses. A lot of times this ends in things sort of twine and other my first game encourages of like press X to jump or whatever, and that ends up being compiled into the game. And it really doesn't take much effort to give your designer a spreadsheet. Hopefully you have something more advanced than Excel if you're at a really big company, but even really big companies use Excel. But you need something. Don't compile strings into your game. They are assets. They need to be treated like assets.
And any text that's player facing at all, like even if it's just a colon, that kind of stuff, don't even write that into the code because spacing works differently.
Right.
Like French likes to put spaces before punctuation at the end of sentences, but if you hard code that in there, then you're stuck. And a lot of this stuff isn't discovered until it goes through
Right.
linguistic QA at that point, like way at the end of the whole process, because they'll see a string that's, oh, why is this still in English? And then they have to report back to us, and then we look into it, and like, oh, it's because the UI programmer just wrote it into the code. But that's never apparent while you're looking at it in English, of course, because it looks how it should.
Yeah, the other thing that has sort of an unintentional pushback because UI programming is more an entry-level programming job, you see a lot of behavior of younger programmers trying to be a hero. So a lot of localization producers with good intentions will be like, everything needs to be locked down on this date. And what you get when you do that is a bunch of people looking for the strings they need that they can kind of work together. So I've seen bugs that are like press plus some button plus whatever to do a thing. And then you just end up with this sentence structure that just, I don't know what it would possibly mean in other languages. So, I mean, when you're messaging things to engineers, if you're a localization producer, please message it in such a way where it's like, yes, we need to be locked down at a certain time, but if you need a string, ask for it. Don't be a hero and try and combine things together. It will not end well. That is not how grammar works.
Yeah, it's over time. Over time, if
Yeah.
you continue to work with your teams, of
Right.
course, they get more receptive to what you have to say. And so it requires a constant dialogue with them.
Yeah. Also on this screen, this is from Polyglot Game Dev, which is an open source thing. You can just look for it on Google. I really like it. If you're in that situation where you're making your first game on your own, this has gone through a lot more like QA than others, and you can tell it's like laid out from people who kind of know what they were doing. So if you have like really generic dialogue, like if you're making a runner clone effectively, or something that's like in a really defined genre, and you need text that's like press start, this is a resource I really like. Also, this is a good introduction to people for country codes versus just languages. So this separates out Brazilian Portuguese and Portuguese, which is another thing people kind of struggle with. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention for my girlfriend, it also gives you Argentinian Spanish.
What?
And Mexican Spanish and Spanish.
Wait, is
Spanish.
well, if you localize something, this is
Yeah.
my question to you, ma'am, is if you're localizing into South American Spanish, is there one that ends up being more? Which one do you pick?
Yeah.
There's so many countries.
Yeah, I mean, I guess generally we have just done Latin American, which is Mexican, and Spain Spanish. I've never been on a project that does a specific South American Spanish, but looking at like watching a bunch of GDC Vault talks, Argentina wins because of population. Like I think this is a market question, a marketing question of like the country with the biggest potential customers will win. And in this case, that's Brazil, but they always get their own Portuguese.
Yeah.
They win the Portuguese match. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are they really different? Can you, if you look at it, can you say like, "Ugh, this is so Colombian"?
Okay, the thing is that, I mean, I'm from Puerto Rico, so I mostly know about, you can say that there's a, like, a Caribbean-ish Spanish that most people speak. And there's, like, Mexican, I mean, honestly,
It is noticeable in Assassin's Creed Black Flag with the Caribbean thing.
Oh, okay.
Who is speaking Caribbean Spanish and who is not. And who is speaking modern Spanish more specifically in that game.
in South America, I'm going to say Argentina.
Well, actually, is that something you can use to your advantage? Can you say this character is going to be from a Caribbean country now in the Spanish version and have him use the dialect or whatever, or words that are kind of unique to that particular one? So you can keep a flavor to the game.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's good.
You can create like a generic Caribbean Spanish.
Okay. So cool.
I would almost compare it to English. Like, you can say, this person is from generic South. And this person is from generic New England and
Okay.
generic Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
But I think people might still tell you, like keeping the English analogy, that you were spelling the word color wrong.
Yes. We still get that.
And then you'll be like, no, you're spelling the word color wrong. And then it'll go for real.
Ours is more efficient, less letters. But UI constraints. UI constraints.
It's shorter. Character counts.
Okay.
But yeah, so other common issues. Yeah.
Yeah. Lack of
Giving
context.
translators context of things. So a lot of times, like Gordon mentioned, if you have a game, you end up here's a big sheet of things.
Yeah.
I hope you know what these words mean. So this is a screenshot from a game Playdom, which is owned by Disney, put out, which is just a hidden object game. The entire purpose of the game is to find things based on a list of words. And this was posted by a bilingual Italian user, which this goes all over. Like this, I found out because you were playing the game in Spanish, which also had this problem of like, there are a lot of noun homophones in English. So this was particularly, the word in English was clearly glasses, and the Italian translation was for drinking glasses when what they meant was eyeglasses. And this was for like a Facebook game, so it's not like they have the excuse that they didn't want to give them an expensive dev kit.
They just didn't care.
Yeah.
We just, you know.
Yeah.
I speak English. They say this means glasses. I will go with what they say because I clearly don't know the language they're speaking. So I'm just gonna
Right.
Best guess. That's what it comes down to a lot of times.
I mean, so yeah, when you can, first just have an internal team, but that's really expensive. If not, like, give your translators builds. I think a lot of people don't understand how common it is that your translators just do not have in-context builds of the game. And that's really difficult. And like they don't really have time to go through things. Like this was like a random game, so even getting things in context would have taken a really long time. But still having a QA person would have caught things like this.
Yeah.
But I feel like this is one of the more common bugs that you see.
Yeah, just misunderstanding context
Yeah.
for it. So for you, for example, if you were to get into translation, really fight for it. Fight for more information than what they initially give you. Like ask for design documents, for a playable version of the game, these kind of things. These all help, and from the producer's point, try and provide as much of that as possible. Whatever you can get from the design people. Hopefully they have well spec'd out design sheets.
The dream.
Don't always happen. So depending on what languages you go to, of course you're gonna lose information or have information that simply isn't there, like number or gender. These are terrible things. Like, I could say a sentence in Korean, which is just like, I could be saying he ate 12 apples or she ate 1 apple, like, and you don't know. You don't know unless you see everything else around it or a picture or something like that. So it,
Japanese is super bad about dropping pronouns. Like,
Yeah.
oh man.
oh, that's right, yeah. Did this happen tomorrow? We don't know. We have no idea.
Say like 16 lines of dialogue ago. They gave you a time then. In theory.
Oh.
But yeah, from the developer side, since you're working on a game for so long and translation comes on at the end of the project, it's hard because you assume somebody knows something and they come back with like a really basic question. You're like, oh yeah, like it's really difficult to have that email relationship with somebody and then also have so many new people on at the end of the project.
Yeah, build up a rapport. That really helps
Yeah.
with the people you're working with, and try and set up some sort of regular communication, whether it's via a query board, like a Google Doc, whatever, anything where translators can write questions and they can be answered in a a fair amount of time. Yeah, any of those things can also improve from the producer's point or the design point, can improve the quality of the final quality of the product you get from the translators. So work with them. I know you're busy, but work with them.
The other big one, if you guys haven't seen the Papers, Please blog post, it's really good. Look up Papers, Please localization, because I don't know if you guys played it. It's a 1984 style game where you're a border agent checking passwords in a totalitarian regime. I've never finished it because it makes me too sad. But it is a very good game.
So many broken families.
But yeah, he goes through making a whole like CSS rendering engine for these, but he had a lot of assets that were just like a handwritten note that he just redrew in Russian, or they actually don't remember the creator's name off the top of my head, but yeah. So you can do this. It is expensive. It takes a lot of time. You need to really think you're going to market them. But the more common thing is on the left, that's Sunset Overdrive, where we had our effects artists bake in a lot of just Scott Pilgrim style text effects, and then we just did the anime thing of overlaying text on top of it.
Subtitling it, basically.
Yeah, like action titling it. But the funny thing was because the artists that were making these weren't in the localization pipeline at all, because our dialogue system, everyone who writes dialogue is on board with how actors work, and everyone who writes UI is on board with how their text works. But when you tell somebody who's not in the normal pipeline to put text in something, they're just going to put text in it. So we were finding these super late. So if you see early on in the process that somebody who's not in the pipeline is putting text in something, that is a problem that needs to be solved one way or another. So yeah, text and images, it's expensive. Also, if you're working on mobile, it makes your game really big. The SKUs work very differently. I know I just started working at Anki, and we do full voice, and it requires a lot of streaming downloads. So telling your engineers about that early, depending on how you're doing things.
Yeah. Well, that can certain regions like China, for example, where most people have data caps, and the bigger your game is, because you have to include all this extra art or extra audio, then it may go beyond what is acceptable there, which is about like 30 megs, I think, in China.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's not huge. But the Papers piece, for example, was a kind of a mistake from the very beginning of design.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way he designed the game.
Right.
And he wrote himself into a corner in that regard, and localizing in the future. That one, the subtitling kind of works.
Yeah.
It's not common. It's not every other,
It kind of works from the viewpoint that it'll get the point across. I think I wrote like BioShock is probably the biggest example of people. Irrational was clearly like, go nuts, environment artists. And there's a lot of blurred lines between what is relevant text and what is not. Mm-hmm. Like I think text in just your world, there's a lot of like what is sort of supposed to give you a feeling of the world versus what is you need to know this because you are going to miss something.
Yeah.
If you don't get that, and
then at that point, if you start only translating the stuff that you need,
Right.
then you're going to have things in 2 languages, and that's disconcerting
Right.
to a player.
The other really good example that I think is a more shade of gray that's interesting to think about is Destiny. So if you guys have played Destiny, it's a game that takes place in the real world. Like Bungie worked really hard to make it feel like that game was real. So there's an entire backstory about how the Chinese colonized the moon and how when you're on Earth, you are specifically in Russia. So the environment artists like went out and put all these signs in Russian. And you just need to know there's an arrow going that way. Arrows are pretty universal. Go left. But you, as non-Russian speakers, you're just like, I hope something's over there. And so that like they felt very strongly was like, this is how we were framing our world. It's not that you don't understand the language. It's that you need to understand the history of our world. The Chinese colonized the moon. But when you're on your hub world, that is in this generic Simese language that everyone needs to speak.
Yeah. Well, clearly then that text wasn't critical.
Right. Yeah.
It was more just flavor,
Yeah.
like to continue the flavor of the world.
Right.
Which is fine.
And that's somebody who knows the game needs to be making those decisions. Otherwise, you end up with if somebody who doesn't know the game ends up making it, you end up with either text overlaying everything, which gives people reading fatigue that no one is going to do, or
Then you just start skipping quests. Like,
Yeah.
I just don't care anymore. Just
Yeah.
tell me what I need to do. So much text.
I don't know, it's not highlighted. What's happening? But yeah, this is another common junior programmer mistake that goes into keying things. Please have common replacers and run through a standard number formatter. A lot of people, a surprising amount of people I've met and trained are unaware that America is completely backwards and we need to reverse our dates when we all go to the metric system.
What happened when I'm composing emails? I have to think like, wait, where's this going again? Okay, Europeans are going to see it. I have to type it. Like, oh. Then I get used to it. I'm like, wait, I like it when you have day, month, year.
It makes
sense.
way more sense.
You can tell me how hot it is over there in Celsius, and I'll understand.
Please talk to me in normal numbers. But yeah, currency symbols also falls in this category. Coins, currency, yeah. And any form of currency needs to be run through a number formatter. If you know programmers, I can talk to them about what the correct formatter are. Unity, C# comes with the regular C# formatters, which are great. They will format everything for you. They will check the user's locale. It's great. It's significantly better support than I'm used to getting in other things. So.
Also, if you're building any kind of game that might have puzzles in it that rely on very cultural specific stuff like this, like a dime. I mean, I don't know if you've looked at a dime, but it never says that it's 10 cents on there. It just says a dime. So if you're from somebody, a British person playing the game, and you don't know exactly that it means 10 cents, then you're trying to see this puzzle perhaps that is relying on coins and currency, and they cannot solve it. They literally cannot, because you haven't thought ahead and thought,
Yeah.
but or puns like monkey wrench.
Yeah.
Is that what a spanner is in England? Monkey wrench is spanner? I don't know. Tools.
No one here speaks English.
I don't know. Those are British people.
Yeah.
My British friend saying I'm gonna knock you up in the morning, and I look at him and I go, what? That's when I know we're speaking together.
Yeah. And the classic have over 30% buffer around any text field in English. English is a very short language. That's the big moral. This is actually where Google Translate comes in really handy. If you can automate your database to print out some temp text and people can see German compound words and Japanese compound words, it's really helpful to the artist because we all have the menu memorized. I could navigate every menu in anything just by muscle memory. So it's good to have just something in that's not English.
Or build scalability into
Right,
the system.
yeah.
Like for tooltips, for example, that in a game where you would have tooltips, just
Right.
have it be able to expand to account for, or either vertically as well, to be able to do 2 lines of text for German, because German is so long.
Yeah, I mean, it's
So long.
that's sort of dangerous because when you tell the most dangerous cases are the compound words that you cannot break up. because
Then
you
you
don't
have to-
know where
yes.
the natural break is.
You start hyphenating them in weird ways.
Right.
and- yeah.
If you can even do that, or like the other solution to this, if you're in a corner late on, is just to put abbreviated, like add a new loc tag that's like this abbreviated, and if it doesn't fit, you abbreviate it. This is unfortunately, this is, as I just praised Unity, this is something Unity is really bad at, is best fit text length. It's not built into Unity itself. If you try to use best fit in Unity, since I can nerd out, I can talk about this. The text fields in Unity, if you hit best fit, it will re-render every bitmap at that level that it thinks it needs. It is horrendously slow. It's an unusable like checkbox. Like it's a checkbox that's just there to troll you. You have to write your own best fit. Flash is a lot better at this if you're using scale form. The shrink to fit works. So yeah, but if you are writing a shrink to fit, still you can't go below HD sizes, which is about 16 points or so.
Oh, I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
not a programmer.
Well, I don't know.
Everything you just said makes no sense to me.
Okay. Well,
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, one suggestion I used to give to a lot of mobile developers, for example, was don't rely so much on text. Try and move away from text if possible. Try and use icons or universal type things. Like instead of saying the word home, just put a little house there. That means you don't have to localize it for one thing, which is super nice. And everybody kind of knows that, okay, house is home. And you don't have to worry about scaling text problems at that point.
Yeah.
No offense to you, but that is a really messy.
Yeah. Well, Sunset Overdrive had a lot of stuff. So
Yeah.
that's how it is. But yeah, speaking of text, here's our wall of text slide about how hard this is.
Yeah.
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 Slang.
Drained of my existence, it's like,
Slang and humor.
Yeah.
So two things that you can't translate them, really.
So you at GaymerX, you hear a lot of talk about genders and pronouns, and it's really important. Like game development is hard, and I like that it's hard, but it's not something developers are not doing because they're lazy. It's something that is a ton of work. That's worthwhile work, but it requires some planning, right? Like if you are including multi-gender characters in your games, you need to. And there's voice acting. You need to accept that you're going to have twice the actors, obviously. And you're also going to have 4 times the number of lines because every time another NPC is referring to that character, you need both lines. So that's a lot more assets. You also need, if you have like a simple case dialogue tree, you need to make sure your dialogue can support calling 2 different tags, depending on what gender that character is and other variables like that. You also need to talk to your writers about not attempting to not be ambiguous. I think a lot of English writers want to be clever and just say and then I'll make this really gender neutral and not realize how many adjectives are gendered in other languages where that's just not going to work.
Yeah. It depends on the languages you're going to, right? Like if you're going to, Polish can change depending on who you're speaking. Your declension of the verbs will change depending on if you're speaking to a male or female. Your tricks won't work at that point. It gets really messy.
Yeah.
We had one problem we had in WildStar was the designers were using you, which for English could be singular or plural. And so our translators at the time would just kind of make their best guess when something would come along because they didn't know if this was content that was intended for solo play, like just regular questing, or is this something they would see in a dungeon where it would be for multiple people, a full party. And the context we were able to give them didn't necessarily say where the strings were coming from. So they just kind of made their best guess. And depending on when design maybe went back and rechanged things, so we had to get those strings retranslated. So you would have a dialogue, like one single dialogue, where it would make the character who's speaking it seem kind of schizophrenic because they would go back and forth between singular and plural. And because the translators didn't know, and we couldn't blame them. So we had to spend a lot of time, a lot of testing time and a lot of review time having our testers go through all the group content to make sure that we were using the proper use. And we've talked to our designers, and they said, okay, we're going to be able to at least put this information into our description stuff that we can give to our translators, so at least our translators know now. But we could do that because, you know, I'm an internal team.
Right.
I can walk over to a designer and say, hey, what's up? But a lot of people don't have that kind of luxury, and that really sucks.
Yeah.
So if you're involved in the design of a game at all, and you can provide that kind of information, don't assume that what you know, other people will know.
Right. This is just sort of the miscellaneous coming to a close end slide. Hopefully more modern engines support lip syncing. If you don't, timestamps and lip flaps are super important for your actors. Yeah, that's getting more common. It's part of the good thing about the rise of in-engine cinematics is you can make those changes. Part of why video games are special, and anime will always have really long English talking. Also, yeah, the other thing is with vulgarity, it helps if your translators are really on board. In Sunset Overdrive, we had a vulgarity filter, and things that are vulgar in other languages are not vulgar in English, so we had to tag vulgarity per language, which meant it was like another thing that needed to completely run through our dialogue system because we had different assets playing, whether it was the bleeped version or the normal version.
So one fun project I had to work on for I forget what game it was, but I had to go through and find profanity lists for multiple languages. So that was super fun. So English, I was like, no, I can write this myself.
You were on a list somewhere.
Not me. But when it came to other languages like Japanese or Chinese, Chinese in particular, doesn't have a lot of just really offensive words. It's all about context for them. So this word is like, oh, it just means pig. That's not so bad, unless you're talking about your mother, and in which case then it's horribly, horribly offensive, like much more so than it would be in English. So these kind of filters don't really work
Right.
in that kind of regard.
Yeah.
Like you know, you played MMOs and they all have this profanity filters and
They're all
people-
like a creativity test.
yeah, it's great. It's like
The player challenges.
yeah. Ugh.
Yeah.
But yeah. So trying to filter out profanity in other languages can get really
Right.
difficult, and that affects the ratings. That affects
Yeah.
whether or not your game gets approved.
Very much so, yeah. And yeah, it's just really hard to know that. In
I know
context.
that, like the United States kind of copped out on that by just saying that online interactions aren't rated. Wash their hands of it and be done. But I don't know if other countries do that at all.
Uh-uh.
Japan's pretty lenient.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
impossible. And the other things that kind of surprise people are like the more intense legal issues you run into. There was a long time where a lot of games wouldn't allow flags because they sort of understood what a political statement that was of what is a country. Like you can't just grab the Wikipedia list of all flags. Like if you include certain countries that are in political dispute as to whether or not they exist, you are making a very strong political statement, whether you intend to or not. Yeah. I can't believe Wolfenstein ships in Germany. It does, but
Artistic licenses? I don't know.
there's I have a friend who's QA in Bethesda. He has so many Nazi symbols memorized.
Oh, it's like those people who have to go through and look for
Yeah.
terrible things on the internet, like child
Yeah,
pornography
like
or whatever,
there's
and then
a-
they just become scarred and hateful people.
You just need to because it's not just the swastika; it's every Nazi symbol
Yeah.
that was ever associated with any group.
88, I didn't know this. So we recently did an event in WildStar that was kind of about Back to the Future. And because we have hoverboards in our game, and those are awesome. And we had one of them just used the word 88 because that's 88 miles per hour. But Germany, you can't use 88. That has associations with, I think it's the SS? I forget. So they had to change it to 141, which is 88 kilometers per hour. So I was like, wow, you learn something every day. That's
Nazism.
cool. Nazism. And one bad thing about SQL, for example, if you use SQL to keep any of your text, and it treats the S set, the German S set, the same as two S's. So if you're going through your game trying to get rid of two S's, because that by itself also SS is verboten, then it's hard to find and hard to replace in the game because SQL just thinks they're the same thing. So you're running into problems that not even things
Yeah.
that you can necessarily deal with because your tools aren't working with you.
Yeah. But yeah, so also more on the indie scene. If you're a AAA developer, spend money. Like, I don't know what else to tell you.
Yeah, if you go with whoever's cheapest,
Yeah.
you get what you pay for, kind of thing.
But yeah, so there is a recent trend of crowdsourcing
man.
your localization.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that, Gordon?
I really hate crowdsourcing things. Like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't work for localization because you need coherent voices when you go into another. Particularly if your game has a lot of text. If you have 20 translators working on it, you're going to have 20 different voices. And so if you have translator A does the first tenth of this character's dialogue, translator B does the second tenth, translator A does the third tenth again, then this person's personality could shift mid-game because you just don't have the same person working on it. And especially if you don't provide style guides, like this is how this character should talk, this is the kind of language it should use.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also doesn't help you with the sort of hard questions about localization, about what markets are worth it to go into. I think that's the other thing, where spending some money up front on market research, if you're a small indie dev, saves you a lot in the long run. Of just some markets just aren't worth going into. If you're a first-person shooter, it's not necessarily worth it to go into Japan. Like, the genre is just not that popular. And other like examples, particularly like if you're a Facebook game, you're gonna need to port to other. That's kind of an outdated example, but social networks, just do some research on where people are in social networks, because iOS is also really predominantly American. Like, if you go to any other country, iOS has a lot more problems, and there's a lot more Android penetration elsewhere. Yeah. I don't think there's less piracy, but there is more Android devices.
I feel like if crowdsourcing is your only option, like if you're a really small indie studio, it can work, but you have to be super selective about how many people you let work on it. You have to hopefully have somebody who takes the reins, takes charge, or you yourself spend time to sort of corral them into being working cohesively. At least being able to review each other's work can also help.
It also works better if you think of it as a beta test, where they are sending you bugs on an existing thing rather than creating content themselves.
Yeah, I would rather not tell an indie developer, don't localize your thing, if they can't afford, say, a good solid vendor to do their work for them. But at least do something and work with the tools you have. And if crowdsourcing is the only tool you have, you can make it work. You can make it work. You just have to be real careful with it. Yeah. Don't just throw a bunch of stuff onto the Steam forums and expect to get good things back.
A good fact about forums. But yes, so this is Futurama. Always a good thing. Plan things from the start.
If you go into localization expecting accolades and praise, that's not going to happen. Basically, yeah, it's the idea that we're localizing into something so that our work isn't seen at all.
Yeah.
Like, we're completely behind the scenes. What we do isn't noticed because we don't want to be noticed. We want to make the product look like it was designed in that region, ideally. So yeah.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yay.
Yay. We can just anything else that wasn't mentioned.
Any questions?
One thing I run into a lot is I'm a localizing producer on visual romance novels from Japan.
Okay.
Negative portrayals of people in our community versus like how far do you go making it more okay without straying too far from the original content, because you do get the trolls on Tumblr.
Right.
Oh my God, this is not the same thing. The gay version should be portrayed more as a feminine, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
kind of balance that with your personal views versus your, I guess, constraints?
Oh boy. Yeah, I was racking my brain this past week about things like how can we turn this panel gay, and I don't really know. There really isn't a whole lot of content coming from outside the United States, and then stuff that's coming from the United States out, I kind of fully expect it to be stripped out. If we're writing content that has gay characters or whatever and it goes to China, I kind of expect that stuff to be taken away. It sucks, but that's the reality of the situation. Now, things that come in, and dealing with these kind of stereotypes like yaoi or all these other kind of things, which I don't get, but I know they're there.
It doesn't personally offend you that someone's made something that's not just for you?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't personally offend me. And I understand that these people, again, are the vocal minority. And again, you have to understand who it is that you're making this content for. Are you making content just for these noisy people, or are you making something that could be enjoyed by a larger subset of people? And that's really the kind of important thing.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to look at about that is how bad a lot of stuff, like a lot of the people that are saying that don't have the context of how weird it would be when you just do direct translations. So there's a lot to keep in mind just about like localization. You want to make something more fit for the culture it's in. That is like the point, and you're not ruining an art form. Games are about making money to some degree, and making it more accessible to a region isn't a crime.
And it really, those people who super complain about a lot of things are usually passionate enough that they've probably studied that language. They've probably done a lot of research into it. So you can be like, well, how about you just play in Japanese? So then you're not getting any of these changes. Then you're getting the original content that you wanted. But we need to make content that is not for just you. We need to make content for a lot of people.
It's ultimately a judgment call, is the answer.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
How do you decide whether to bring over things that are unique to a culture in translations versus saying, well, there's a different analog in this other country for that, so we're doing that? And specifically thinking about games like in the Persona series, they kept the whole system of like senpai and addressing people differently.
Mm-hmm.
How do you decide whether to keep the what there before and maybe just fiddle with the language versus wholesale passion?
You can keep a lot of stuff if you explain it properly. There's this, one example I like to illustrate is Spirited Away has this one scene in it where, if you're familiar with the movie, the main character, Sen, is in the boiler room with this guy with way too many arms. And so she steps on a little slug thing, and then he tells her about this little ritual to do to break the curse. And he's like, okay, put your fingers together and you do this thing. And but if you watch that in Japanese, there's no dialogue in that point, because the kid knows what to do. It's like circle, circle, dot, dot, now you have a cootie shot kind of thing. Because for the Japanese audience, they know exactly what she's doing. They don't have to explain it. So, but for the American one, they like the character is thankfully off screen, so he can continue to talk. But yeah, he talks about whatever to do, and so he's using that. He's explaining what's happening there, rather than them having to reanimate that scene or cut it, which actually they couldn't do because Ghibli said no. Which I appreciate. They had an artistic vision and they want it to be maintained. So if you have some kind of content which is you think that your target audience doesn't understand, take the time to either rework preceding dialogue or rework the situation to explain it. And then people learn something, which is kind of cool. And maybe they'll be interested in it. Maybe they'll go and explore and learn more about a culture that isn't their own.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of the advantage with Persona. They knew they were dealing with a lot of core gamers as their market. And
Yeah.
I think it's sort of like game mechanics, where once one game has a mechanic, you can kind of build on it. I think with a lot of the Japanese honorifics, Tokyo Pop did a ton of heavy lifting for everyone else in the late 90s. And then that's something that we can sort of expect people do actually know.
Yeah.
If they're sort of following JRPGs. And so, yeah, but that's a hard assumption to make.
We kind of have it comparatively easy with Japanese, honestly. But if you bring a lot of things from Korea, for example, a lot of people don't understand a lot of those. Blade and Soul, for example, is a game coming over, and a lot of the Korean names had to be completely redone because people have a lot of difficulty pronouncing Korean names. So we had to change a lot of them, and that really was unfortunate. But there's not that whole subculture of people who have just devoured Korean media to be able to. We're getting the camera. Sorry.
People can come up afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Follow
I will
follow
chat
me on
about this
Twitter.
for days.
I have so much to say.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.